Audio Jungle.
Squire stabbed it with a knife, and the 3-meter-long blade was completely wiped out. Click, and the tooth-piercing continuous sound, cracks radiated from the long knife as the center. In an instant, the floor of the entire transfer hall was covered with cracks. It wasn't until this time that the staff of the City of Advancement finally realized that this was a terrible invasion, and that the non-Empress had come to hand over the bounty prisoners again. When panicked, it was too late to react. The feeling of this knife. The Empress had just noticed the abnormality of Squayad's knife, and the floor under her feet had instantly turned into powder, unable to bear any weight anymore. In the dust, everyone and everything in the hall fell down at the same time. Squayad and Makagai, who had been prepared for a long time, landed lightly. Roja walked down with ease. As if stepping on a ladder invisible to the naked eye, the mood is very leisurely. Due to the momentary distraction, the Empress fell into a rather embarrassing situation. Fortunately, Salome, who was inseparable from her, stretched out at full speed. When her tail touched the ground, her body also supported the Empress and slowly brought her to the ground. However, all the Empress's attention was still on Squayad's knife just now. His eyes kept moving back and forth between Roja and Squayad. I exclaimed in my heart, the feeling of this knife is clearly the trick of Hawkeye Myhawk. In such a short period of time, I have never seen him teach Squayad at all. How did Squayad master this blow? But looking at Roja, who walked down lightly, the Empress immediately realized that this sword was different from Hawkeye's sword. No, there is no arrogance in this knife. There is only pure sword energy. Squayad not only mastered Hawkeye's trick, but he is even more proficient than Hawkeye. The sword energy used is less than 1/10 of Hawkeye's, but its lethality is even worse. Thinking of this, the Empress looked at Roja with even more fiery and complicated eyes. The sudden situation in the lobby naturally alarmed the entire ground and basement floors immediately. In the office on the first floor, the Deputy Warden Domino's expression suddenly changed, and he rushed out the door. When she rushed into the monitoring room against the smoke and dust, she realized that with the collapse of the hall, a small half of the floor of the monitoring room was also broken. The monitoring screens covering the walls have all turned into snowflakes. The giant surveillance phone bug responsible for collecting the screen information of each surveillance phone bug also hangs its head, not knowing whether it is alive or dead. Damn it! Who is so bold, dare to come to the city to wreak havoc? While cursing, Domino walked around the large pothole in the center of the hall and ran towards the elevator leading to the lower floor. As for who smashed the hall floor and who was under the dust, she would not be so stupid as to rush down to find out what happened. Directly below the hall on the first floor is also a round hall. Corridors in all directions lead to various cell areas. Roja's knowledge have already scanned the entire prison, and he has a clear picture of the prison floor plan and the distribution of guards. Raising his hand and pointing to the corridor on the left, Squayad and Makagai rushed in quickly. Roja smiled and looked at the Empress, who was still a little dazed, stretched out her arms, and made a gesture of invitation. The smile returned to the Empress's face. The Empress stretched her waist forward, jumped off Salome, and just landed beside Roja. The left arm hugged Roja's open right arm and stuck it tightly. Roja was slightly taken aback, smiled and retracted his arms, and walked deep into the corridor with the Empress. The Empress smiled and said, "Your Excellency, the Fifth Emperor is planning to destroy the torture facilities on every floor, eliminate all the jailers, and completely destroy this prison. Is this concubine right?" Roja felt the special touch on his arm, nodded and said, "Yes, the prison does have its value and significance, but this prison, hee." The prisoners in the cell along the way, seeing the 4 people passing through freely one after another, finally couldn't hold back. They slammed on the iron gate and shouted frantically, "Let us out, friend! How did you get out of the cell? Let us go out." We all rush up together. The chances of escaping are even greater. Roja was unmoved by the shouts of these people. Those who can be captured by the Navy and put in the first-tier prison are either really stupid or have really committed an unforgivable capital crime. This kind of people, if they are left here to fend for themselves, it is definitely impossible to release them. Seeing Roja walk by with no expression on his face, for the prisoners in the cell behind them, their hope was instantly shattered and turned into anger. "Bastard! Let us out, little bastard! Open the cell door to me immediately, or I will kill you, believe it or not." Amidst all kinds of threatening voices, a joking voice suddenly sounded. "You guys are really stupid. You can't even get out by yourself, but you threaten to kill others. It makes me laugh to death. How do you kill people? Are you staring at others to death? What an idiot. No wonder you're locked up on the first floor." A prisoner sternly said, "Hey, you are also locked on the first floor, and you are also in the cell. Who is the real idiot?" The person who spoke before took a step forward, and his body suddenly split into countless pieces. After passing through the railing, he reassembled into a complete body. He turned around and pinched the clown's nose on his face, and said in his unique voice, "Of course you are the idiots. I can leave anytime, just to amuse you." After finishing speaking, he made a grimace and then slapped the prisoners rising up, before running wildly towards Roja. After running a few steps, his hands separated from his body and flew out again. Not long after, holding a huge axe, he returned to his body, and he himself just caught up with Roja. "Hey, Your Excellency the Fifth Emperor, can you take me away with you? I'm Bucky, and as you can see, I'm a happy, treasure-hunting clown." Roja smiled noncommittally. He didn't like this flamboyant guy, but he didn't hate him either. Seeing this, Bucky hurriedly showed his worth, leaped forward vigorously, and stopped in front of Roja. Pointing to the corner of the corridor behind him, he said, "Be careful. There are usually surveillance phone bugs at such corners, and they will expose our whereabouts to the surveillance room. You must dispose of them carefully before you can continue." While speaking, Roja had already walked away from him with the Empress and continued to walk forward. Well, just pretend I didn't say it." Bucky stuck to the corner and looked carefully at the corner, but found that the surveillance phone bug on the wall seemed to be falling into a deep sleep. What the hell, do surveillance phone bugs need to sleep too? "Hey, Lord Fifth Emperor, you can't go that way anymore." Bucky came back to his senses and saw that Roja was heading in the direction of the Blade Forest area where the prisoners were tortured, so he hurriedly shouted and chased after him. "My lord, there are extremely sharp plants inside, and they will be chopped into pieces if you are not careful. That's why this floor is called the Red Lotus Hell." Before he finished speaking, Squiat suddenly accelerated and rushed straight into the blood-red Blade Forest. Squiat raised the giant chopping knife in his hand, and without a word, it was a sweep. A gigantic crescent-like sword chi soared out from the giant chopping knife. Wherever it passed, the odd roots of the sword leaf trees were broken, and the needle grass on the ground was instantly reduced to dust. All kinds of poisonous insects lurking in the leaves and grass also popped out of their hiding places in a panic, flying or jumping, trying to get out of the damaged range of the sword energy. However, no matter how fast they are, they cannot be faster than sword energy. Instantly poked by the sword energy, it exploded into clouds of poisonous mist in the air. Then it was blown away by the strong wind blowing with the sword energy, and completely disappeared. Bucky shoved his hands into his mouth in shock, gnawing on his nails non-stop. He tremblingly said, "What a terrifying sword energy. Is this the confidence for you to break into the prison? It's so touching. It would be great if everyone could see the situation here." Squiad's knife completely destroyed 1/3 of the Red Lotus Hell. He took a breath and slashed out twice in a row, directly destroying all the plants and poisonous insects in the entire area. Bucky was so startled that he almost lost his ability to speak. He stammered and said, "Isn't this kind of sword energy expendable? Send it randomly?" Hearing this, Squiad just smiled, not bothering to explain. The sword energy seems to be violent, but in fact it consumes very little. Create maximum damage with minimum energy through superior control. This effect is exactly the product of Roja's continuous improvement of the skill of returning life. Compared to Master, I'm just getting started with this technique. Squiat sighed silently and was about to ask for instructions on the next move. In the passage at the end of the Red Lotus Hell, more than a dozen strange-looking guys have rushed out. It's the jailer Blue Gorilla on this floor, very powerful. Bucky's enthusiastic science popularization had just started, but he had to stop, because the dozen or so blue orangutans fell to the ground twisted and twisted. There are also very dazzling platinum electric sparks shining on their bodies. Stunned all the blue orangutans with a lightning knife? If I remember correctly, he should be Leiching Maka guy, right? Since when has it become so powerful? Maka guy sheathed his knife and looked proudly at Skuyard. He strode forward and jumped to the deep pit in the middle of Red Lotus Hill. Squiat snorted lightly and jumped down immediately after him. Roja looked at the Empress and said with a smile, "The first layer of Red Lotus Hill, it is announced to break through, not bad." As he said, he took a step forward and stepped into the deep pit. The Empress was naturally also driven by him, as if stepping on an elevator, she landed slowly. Only Salome and Bucky were left, one man and one snake, looking at each other. Bucky looked at the dark pit with his head and swallowed, said to Salome, "Hey, are you sure your master is not going in the wrong direction? There is no one who goes deep into the lower level of the prison instead of fleeing up." Samero shook his head and jumped straight into the deep pit. Bucky looked back at the passage he had come from, finally gritted his teeth, and made up his mind. "Okay, follow the boss to survive, fight." After speaking, he dropped the giant axe on his back, closed his eyes, and jumped into the deep pit. At this time, Domino had already taken the elevator to the 4th floor underground. Before even knocking on the door, he rushed directly into Magellan's office. "Report to the warden, there is an enemy invasion. At this moment, I am afraid they have already broken into the basement floor." The only response to her was the crackling sound in the bathroom, and an unspeakable stench. Domino, who was running out of breath, hurriedly held his breath, but didn't dare to retreat, and the situation suddenly became very embarrassing. Ugh! After a series of strange loud noises, Magellan finally heard a satisfied sigh. "Hee hee, today is another satisfying battle." "Domino, your sense of knowledge still hasn't improved. The enemy has advanced to the 2nd basement floor. Why don't you hurry up and organize the beasts to resist? If you are so wasteful that you let them enter the 3rd basement, I can guarantee that I will have a cleaning position that is very suitable for you waiting for you." Domino snapped a salute and could only admit that he was unlucky and ran towards the elevator. The warden Sherlouf suddenly disappeared, and she, the deputy warden, could only stand on top. Even if you die in battle, you can't come to the warden to be a cleaner. Think of the dire consequences of washing Magellan's toilet. In an instant, Domino already had the determination to fight to the death. Even if he died at the hands of the enemy, it would be times more polluted than being polluted by all kinds of poisonous feces pulled out by the poisonous man Magellan every day. Magellan came out of the toilet, rubbed his stomach, and walked back to the desk, talking to himself non-stop. No one has ever dared to attack the prison, and no one has ever successfully invaded the prison. The enemy this time must be the elite of Whitebeard's elite. This gang of damned Marines actually deliberately released false news, tricking Whitebeard into sending people to attack the prison so as to relieve their own pressure. I really want to release all the prisoners and let them go to the Navy headquarters to make a big fuss. With a soft plop, Bucky finally landed safely. Huh? Why is the floor on the 2nd basement floor soft? Not only is it soft, but it is also covered with feathers? When he was wondering, he saw the backs of Roja and the Empress, who had disappeared around the corner ahead. When he rushed over to catch up, Bucky suddenly realized that what he was stepping on just now was actually a huge corpse. Huge and feathered, is it the legendary jailer Basilisk? I didn't hear a sound at all, just like that, was wiped out? Bucky's footsteps were slightly stagnant, and he finally didn't turn around to confirm his guess. In any case, following Roja's footsteps is the safest way. While running forward, he left his left hand behind. After some groping, he successfully found the cell key from Basilisk's body, opened the cells one by one, and released all the prisoners on this floor. Bucky's small movements naturally couldn't escape Roja's sense of knowledge. In this regard, Roja just laughed it off. Prisoners at this level are actually just rations for all kinds of ferocious beast jailers. The beasts had been wiped out by Squayat and Makagai, and the prisoners didn't want to let them go, so there was little difference. In the Navy headquarters, Lu Chi knocked on the door of Sengoku. Report to the Marshal, there is news from the city that Roja has broken into the prison, but for some unknown purpose, he is cleaning up the plants and poisonous insects in the Red Lotus Hell. After listening to Lu Chi's report, Jean Gua also frowned, not understanding the purpose of Roja's move. But he didn't rush to a conclusion either. Just said, very well, continue to keep an eye on the situation over there. If there is any change, come and report immediately. Lu Chi nodded, smiled, and turned to leave. Jean Gua looked at Lu Chi's back, and the domineering arrogance that had been spread out secretly for a long time gradually returned. Without any psychological changes, the intelligence should be credible. There is only one day left before the execution, and Roja still has to spend time and effort to destroy the Red Lotus Hell. Come to think of it, he is really ready to stand on his own. Also, it has been made clear that Whitebeard is used as a bait to attract the Navy. No, you can't be so hasty. It won't be too late to make a conclusion after waiting for the follow-up information. Jean Gua took a deep breath, but couldn't hide the smile on the corner of his mouth. He got up and poured himself a glass of red wine, half lying on the sofa and savoring it carefully. The large submarine prison, the second basement floor, in an open square with a height of 50 meters. Roja and the other four finally stopped. Squayat and Makagai each guarded a corridor leading into the square. Roja is facing the oversized arch opposite. The sound of messy footsteps was rushing from the corridors on both sides, and in the huge arch opposite, there was also the sound of slow but unusually heavy footsteps. Every time this footstep falls, the entire square is shaken lightly. Bucky finally caught up. Staring blankly at the huge arch, he said in a trembling voice, "My Lord Fifth Emperor, let's run away quickly. This footstep is probably the most ferocious sphinx." Before the words were finished, several ferocious beasts rushed out of the corridors on both sides. Facing Squayad was a little hippopotamus running wildly. Although this little hippopotamus is less than half a meter tall, its running posture is like a bulldozer running at full power. Every step you step on, you can step on a huge footprint several meters in size. Seeing such a strange situation, Squayad frowned slightly. After thinking for a while, he finally gave up the giant chopping knife in his hand. Instead, he used a long knife around his waist, and once Juha drew out the knife, he slashed in the direction of the little hippopotamus. This knife doesn't have any fancy sword energy, but it's so fast that it can't be caught. Bucky only felt a blur in front of his eyes, and Squayard had already sheathed his knife. On the other hand, the little hippopotamus kept running in a straight line as if it hadn't been hurt at all. No hits? Just as the confusion in Bucky's heart arose, he saw the little hippo tripped suddenly, fell to pieces, and shattered to the ground. Such a tragic way of death, even Bucky, who has long been accustomed to being torn apart because of his fruit ability, has no reason to feel the intense pain from the bone marrow. Absolutely don't provoke this big vortex spider again. What rushed out of the corridor on the other side were two huge scorpions. The scorpion tail is thick and long like the thighs of a strong man, and it glows with a strange red light, making it look extremely frightening. But Makagai, who was guarding the corridor, didn't pay attention to the two scorpions, but stared up at the ceiling of the corridor. In the shadow of the ceiling, there are two miserable green gemstones hanging very strangely. "Think I haven't found you, naive?" Makagai sneered, and the long sword in his hand came out, stabbing at the middle of the two gems. The moment the long sword was released from his hand, a streak of white gold lightning shot out from the tip of the sword. A shrill scream erupted from the green gemstone, but their masters have already lost the chance and ability to dodge. Amidst the pungent burnt smell, a huge mouse fell from the shadow of the ceiling, twitched a few times, and completely lost its vitality. Those two huge scorpions, which were still baring their teeth and claws before, looked at each other, their thin legs frantically swiped, and retreated back to the depths of the corridor. After Squad drew out his sword and slashed with Juha, he picked up the giant sword again and rushed into the corridor. Soon, there was the wail of an unknown beast in the corridor. Markagai also rushed into the corridor on the side of his handle almost at the same time. Seeing this, Roja was a little dumbfounded. "These two guys, are you deliberately creating opportunities for me to perform?" Roja glanced at the smiling and silent Empress and took a step forward. At the same time, a huge head protruded from the huge arch opposite. There are sharp fangs all over the mouth, and the smallest fangs are the size of an adult's arm. Under the white mane is a strange dark purple skin. There were scars everywhere on the skin, the longest one running across most of his forehead. Judging from the size of this head, his body is at least 30 meters high. Sphinx. It's really a sphinx, Bucky exclaimed, but couldn't help but backed away. He had heard enough horror stories about the beast during his time in captivity. Hearing someone calling his name, the Sphinx roared and rushed forward. The huge figure was finally fully displayed in front of Roja's eyes, and without any temptation, he raised his two front paws, which were too thick to be described in words, and slapped down directly on the position where Roja was standing. The huge figure must bring absolute strength. This shot, still more than 10 meters away from the ground, has already formed a strong wind pressure. It's like countless blowers blowing air on the top of the head, blowing down wildly. Bucky was already scared to death, and while running backwards, he shouted, "Master Fifth Emperor, run!" Such a monster cannot be defeated at all, it must have the ability to restrain the fruit. Suddenly, the wind pressure stopped. The whistling sound in my ears disappeared completely. Only Roja sighed softly. Bucky realized instantly that he was very stupid and seriously underestimated Roja's strength. Among the group of 4 who invaded the prison, Roja was clearly the leader. How could Roja's strength be worse than Squad and Markagai? This is a pirate world where strength is the most important thing. Bucky turned his head tremblingly, but saw that Roja was still standing there leisurely, as if he hadn't moved at all. And the terrifying pair of front paws of the Sphinx still hovered more than 10 meters in front of him, falling into a strange static state. The point is, there is unconcealable fear in Sphinx's eyes. The king of beasts on the second floor of the subterranean prison was so frightened that he didn't dare to continue attacking without finishing his move. Soon, the huge body of the Sphinx trembled with fear. Seeing this situation, Roja completely lost interest in it. "It's not easy for you to grow up so big, so I won't beat you up today. Get out." Before the words fell, the Sphinx turned around and ran back into the arch. With such a huge body running wildly like a frightened mouse, one can imagine the shock it can cause. The entire second floor seemed to be collapsing. The strong vibration was even transmitted directly to the 6th floor underground. Jinbei, who was closing his eyes to recharge his energy, suddenly opened his eyes. He pondered, such a shock can only be produced by a body as huge as a Sphinx. Did the straw hat break into the prison? It's really reckless as always, even attacking blindly without knowing that Ace is not in prison at all. Jinbei struggled with his arm, but the chain made of Hylu stone made him weak all over, and he couldn't break free from the shackles at all. I hope this kid can find out what's wrong sooner and escape. In the warden's room on the 4th basement floor, Magellan slapped the monitor on the table with a violent slap. He roared angrily, "Where's the surveillance video I wanted? Why hasn't it been connected yet?" Several jailers faltered, but none of them could tell why. Because not only all the monitoring phone bugs, but even ordinary phone bugs have all fallen into a strange deep sleep, and they can't be woken up no matter what. The entire submarine prison has completely fallen into a state of information paralysis. All messages must be delivered manually by them. Looking at the terrified jailers, Magellan became even more furious. "Hannibal, little Sadie, where did these bastards go? What are you doing in a daze? Hurry up and find these bastards. Let them capture the intruder immediately." Could it be that the warden wants to do it himself and poison the entire prison to death? As if they had received a pardon, several jailers hurriedly escaped from the horrible and foul-smelling place of the warden's room. Domino wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, forced himself to calm down, and entered the warden's room. "Report to the warden, the interception operation on the second basement floor has failed." The enemy completely frightened the Sphinx with only its aura. It was so frightened that it ran away and didn't dare to fight at all. The jailer beasts on the second floor have been completely lost, and the prisoners have begun to riot. Speaking of this, Domino quietly observed Magellan's expression through the lens. What was thinking in his heart was what Magellan had just roared. He continued, "Master Prison, please be aware that it's not that the subordinates are not doing enough to stop it, but that there are too few manpower available. Neither the demon jailer nor the blue guerrilla troops can be mobilized. The jailer beasts are nowhere to be found. Commander Hannibal can't be contacted. The subordinates are really helpless." Magellan laughed twice and said darkly, "Domino, the warden has just finished using the toilet and hasn't flushed it. You can go in and start working." Domino turned pale with fright, his legs gave way and fell to the ground, and his beautiful blonde hair was scattered. Begging for mercy, "Master Prison, don't. This subordinate has really tried his best." Magellan slapped the table and said coldly, "This warden has given you 2 chances, twice, but you haven't even got the basic information of the intruder. I don't know anything about the number of intruders or their level of strength. So incompetent, how dare you boast that you have tried your best? Immediately go to the warden to wash the toilet. After the intrusion is over, the warden will clean up with you trash one by one." Domino didn't dare to quibble and hurriedly crawled into the toilet. Only then did Magellan sigh softly and said to himself, "If the second floor is lost, if Salutii's defense line on the third floor is also breached, the consequences will be disastrous. Communications are completely paralyzed. It is impossible to stick to the Navy and wait for rescue." On the stairs leading to the third underground floor, the Empress finally couldn't hold back her doubts. Asked, "Lord Roja, the one who frightened the Sphinx just now, shouldn't it be the domineering look?" The Empress herself has developed the domineering look of the Overlord to a very high level, and she knows the look of the Overlord very well. But from the beginning to the end, she didn't sense any fluctuation of domineering aura from Roja. This is very strange. In addition to domineering, do other domineering also have a deterrent effect? Or Roja has developed a brand new domineering besides the 3 domineering? Roja sensed the Empress's full of doubts. After pondering for a moment, I still explained to her, "I just used my knowledge and arrogance to let it see the future of being killed by me after I made a move." The Empress couldn't help being startled, and subconsciously asked, "Is this the ability to predict the future of the top-level knowledgeable? But why do I always feel that something is wrong?" Behind the two, Bucky, who had been making noise all the time, was also silent at this moment. On the one hand, he was overwhelmed by Roja's mystery and strength. On the other hand, he actually wanted to know the answers to these questions. Roja didn't want to answer these questions that were meaningless to others except himself. But I saw the thirst for knowledge flickering in the eyes of the Empress and her delicate and charming appearance when she was thinking. Finally, he couldn't help but shook his head with a wry smile. "Forget it, let's give these guys some science." Immediately, he chuckled and said, "The top-level predictive ability you know is actually just when you are fighting someone, you can briefly predict the opponent's upcoming move based on the opponent's breath. And the method I used just now is to directly instill this foreseeable future into the opponent's will and carry out a psychological battle." Psychological warfare. The Empress and Bucky exclaimed in unison. "Doesn't it mean that as long as the other party's knowledge development is not as good as Lord Roja, they will not be able to develop the courage to fight against you, my lord? No wonder Hawkeye Myhawk's behavior was so weird before. Roja smiled and said, "My hawk's heart is relatively strong," and, at that time, it was actually his own domineering and knowledgeable who made the inevitable prediction of defeat. The Empress murmured immediately, "From this point of view, the domineering power of knowledge and knowledge is actually the strongest power, because it is a power that can really hit people's hearts directly." Roja smiled noncommittally. At the same time, an interesting thought came to mind. If you continue to increase your knowledge-colored domineering attribute above the mutation level, what will it be? With this in mind, I have a little more expectation for the strategy of advancing the city, because, after this battle, his reputation will inevitably shock the world again. Following this, the Navy will have to substantially increase the amount of rewards. In this way, he can have enough attribute points to experiment with his ideas. A large submarine prison with 3 floors underground. As soon as he walked out of the stairwell, the scorching breath rushed towards his face. With a thought in Roja's mind, the domineering aura of knowledge and knowledge has come out through his body, form a protective cover of about 2 meters, enveloping himself and the Empress together. Although the domineering color of knowledge cannot provide a substantial barrier like the armed color, it can still be easily done by simply forming a barrier to block heat convection. Moreover, Roja's domineering energy is endless, so he doesn't need to care about this small consumption at all. The Empress was a little surprised and said, "I heard before that the temperature on the 3rd floor underground is extremely hot. Why can't I feel it at all now?" Bucky in the back naturally cannot enjoy the top-notch treatment of the Empress's world's most beautiful woman. Already sweating profusely, he said with difficulty, "My Lord Empress, it's really hot here." Only then did the Empress come to her senses, and she took another look at the calm and breezy Roja, and immediately realized that it was Roja who helped her shield herself from the heat wave. Looking at Roja's eyes, unconsciously, a little more admiration was added. Because of her background and experience, she has to be competitive. How has she ever experienced the feeling of being cared for by a powerful opposite sex? Naturally, he became more and more intoxicated by the strong sense of security when getting along with Roja, unable to extricate himself. Bucky's already hot throat was smoking, and he was stuffed with dog food so hard that he almost collapsed on the spot. Quickly walked a few steps, overtook Roja and the Empress, and came to the side of Squad and Makagai, who opened the way, so that they could not see and feel sad. However, Squad and Makagai also looked very normal, and they didn't mean to be hot or unbearable at all. Bucky wiped the sweat from his head and face, and couldn't help asking, "Boss Squad, how do you resist the scorching heat here? Looking at our friendship, can you teach me?" Hearing this, Squad snorted coldly and said, "What kind of friendship do we have? This is a unique skill taught to me by the master. How can I teach you?" Bucky's expression froze, and he tried his best to keep up with Squad's footsteps with his head down, without the vitality of the previous 2 floors. This level of hunger hell is full of sweeping dust. Although there is a barrier of knowledge and domineering, but such a harsh environment, it is inevitable that people will feel a little anxious. Although Roja was not affected, seeing the slightly frowned brows of the Empress made her heart move. He opened his mouth and explained, "The heat on this floor actually comes from the scorching blood pool on the 4th floor underground, and the prisoners on this floor don't get any water and food supplies. So, the prisoners are dehydrated and mummified very quickly. The high temperature will accelerate the weathering of the mummy. Over time, the sand and dust floating in this layer have been formed." The Queen's feet just stepped into a small pile of sand. Hearing Roja's words, he was shocked immediately and jumped up from the ground. That scene was very much like a girl who saw a snake while walking on the road. Seeing the cute and playful scene of the Empress, Roja shook his head and chuckled lightly, saying, "Okay, here it is." The panic on the Empress' face disappeared instantly. Squad stopped with Makagai. Bucky was taken aback for a moment, not understanding what Roja's intention was for stopping the team. But the scorching heat from the soles of his feet had reached the point where he couldn't stand up. Finally unable to withstand the test of survival, he knelt down in front of Roja and kowtowed. "Please, Lord 5th Emperor, teach me how to resist the scorching heat. I will definitely try my best to find the greatest treasure in the world and dedicate it to you, Lord." Roja couldn't help laughing and said, "Find the world's biggest treasure? Then you will become the One Piece King?" Bucky was stunned for a moment and said with a mournful face, "My lord, don't make fun of me." Roja said indifferently, "If you can survive the next battle, I will accept you as a vassal pirate group. How about it?" After finishing speaking, without waiting for Bucky's answer, he said loudly, "Sarudes, I have stepped into your trap for so long, and you still dare not activate it." Roja's voice echoed in the empty square. The only response to him seemed to be the bone meal that was continuously blown up by the hot wind. Bucky looked around in a daze, not understanding what the trap Roja was referring to. Just as I was about to ask a question, a sudden change occurred. A huge shadow suddenly covered the top of his head. Boom! Amid the heavy falling sound, the strong wind blowing the bone powder under heavy objects made it even more dusty. For a moment, all I could see were 4 extremely majestic figures standing in the exploding smoke and dust. "You are very arrogant, intruder. You're still brazenly saying that you stepped into my trap, so let me see what you're capable of." With a slightly immature voice, the smoke and dust gradually fell, revealing the true faces of the 4 extremely majestic figures: Minotaur, Eno Zebra, Eno Rhino, Eno Koala. Bucky looked from left to right, seeing the true faces of the 4 figures in his eyes. He was beyond shocked. He yelled wildly in his heart, "These 4 jailer beasts, any one of them alone is enough to suppress a prison." Now all 4 are gathered. Sure enough, it's a terrible trap. The 5th Emperor, why did you lead us into such a trap? Bucky was about to observe Roja's expression so as to find a reason for himself to feel at ease. Suddenly, there was another crash on the walls on both sides and front and back. Countless hidden compartments suddenly opened. The Blue Guerrilla Brigade, prison bombers, and army wolves lined up neatly in a square formation, swarming out from the dark space. Soon, around Roja and the others, a majestic offensive formation formed. In every direction, there are at least 100 army wolves leading the charge. Behind them, there is a blue orangutan and 50 ready to go. At the end of the array, there is a dense army of prison bombers, which is rapidly building a simple sandbag position. The atmosphere in the square was immediately pushed to the edge of frightening by this group of powerful soldiers who suddenly rushed out. As the smoke cleared, Bucky finally saw the commander of the unit. It was Saludes, who was less than half a meter tall, standing in front of the 4 jailer beasts. Saludes shook the trident in his hand and said, "Prepare to die, because, to hold Her Majesty the Empress hostage, you must pay the price of your life." Luoyu was slightly stunned and looked down at the Empress in his arms. He smiled and said, unexpectedly, "Such a little thing is also your admirer." The Empress blushed and hurriedly defended, "I can't control so many inexplicable guys in this world." Roja laughed for a while. When the laughter stopped, he uttered a cold and heartless syllable, "Kill." Skuyard shouted and jumped out. Swinging the giant chopping knife in his hand, facing the front is a blow to sweep away thousands of troops. Take for extremely majestic jailer beasts. Boom! 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 There were 4 terrible crashing sounds in a row, almost connected as one. The 4 jailer beasts were thrown backwards almost at the same time. Squad was also backed up again and again by the powerful counter-shock force. But his power to sweep away thousands of troops has almost shattered the courage of the prison bombing troops, for huge jailer beasts, like boulders randomly thrown by trebuchets. It flew and fell into the sandbag positions of the prison bombing troops and rolled into a mess. With just one blow, the position of the prison projectile troops facing Roja's direction was completely destroyed, and it was impossible to fire even a single projectile. And Saradize, who was standing in front of the 4 jailer beasts, was blown away by the berserk knife energy from the giant knife. It seems that it will also crash into the prison bombing force position with the jailer beast. However, it was hit by the shock wave that erupted after the collision between Squad and jailer beast weapons, and the whole person flew backwards and fell towards Roja. Clap! Saradize was slammed to the ground and just landed at Roja's feet. Roja took advantage of the situation and stepping on it, said to the Empress, "Look at this little snake following you all the time. It makes me want to get a pet to keep." The Sphinx on the upper floor was pretty good, quite obedient. "It's a pity that it's too big, so it's not convenient to take it with you. What do you think of this little monkey?" At this moment, Saradise's hat was blown off by the shock wave. A small furry head was exposed, and at first glance, it was indeed somewhat similar to a monkey. The Empress glanced down and said, "It seems to be really a monkey. No wonder it is called I am a monkey with such a strange name." First, she was stepped on by Roja, and then the Empress made fun of her own name. At this moment, Salutes was completely furious. The two small eyes flashed red and roared, "You! Damn! Damn! I'm going to kill you!" At the same time, he moved his arm with difficulty, bringing the root of the trident to his mouth. This trident is actually a flute, a tool for controlling the blue gorilla troops. In a rage, Salutes gave the blue gorilla an order to kill wildly with the sound of the flute without hesitation. And the sound of the flute also affected the larger number of army wolves. The terrifying roar of wild beasts filled the entire square in an instant and rushed straight to the third floor upstairs. The eyes of nearly 1,000 army wolves all turned bloodthirsty scarlet. The long dark red tongue fell out from between the teeth, continuously dripping white foam and mucus. And the blue orangutans, who numbered more than 300, suddenly exploded in size. From the original 2-meter-5 man, he turned into a 3-meter-high man in one fell swoop, with upper body muscles as thick as an adult giant bear. Surrounded by such formidable enemies, Bucky was so frightened that he collapsed to the ground. His whole body was torn apart into countless pieces, and he was actually planning to play dead to avoid this disaster. Squad, however, is fearless. The giant chopping knife was placed horizontally in front of the chest, the handle of the knife was tightly grasped with the right hand, and the back of the knife was pushed with the left hand. Aim at the position where the blue gorilla troops are most densely populated, and attack with full force. Not to be outdone, Makugai turned into a platinum lightning bolt, instantly pulling out a lightning circle in the square. His speed was so fast that he couldn't catch it with his eyes. He could only see a series of high-speed platinum lightning bolts. Wherever the lightning went, the army wolf instantly froze and fell dead. Even though the strength of Squad and Makugai has long since changed, but helplessly, the number of enemies is too many. In just a few seconds, they were overwhelmed by hundreds of orangutans and army wolves. Hundreds of army wolves, as well as hundreds of blue orangutans, finally broke through their line of defense. Moreover, there will be more beasts breaking through in the future. Seeing this dangerous situation, the Empress straightened her waist and was about to shoot from Roja's side. She was mentally prepared for a hard fight, because these beasts obviously cannot be controlled by her fruit ability. With a block of Roja's arm, he easily relieved the strength of the Empress' waist. He smiled lightly. "Don't worry, Squad and the others are fine." Saradise forced his head up and said with a smirk, "You should worry about yourself, bastard. But now, even if you worry, it's useless. My lovely pets will tear you into pieces and eat them all. Everything is between lightning and flint." The prison bombing force finally completed the first round of shooting at this time. A hail of bullets shot towards Roja and the others from all directions in various unexpected gaps. "Empress, I couldn't help but turn pale." Bucky, thrusting his head into a pile of bone meal. The corner of Roja's mouth showed a slight smile of disdain. The field of knowledge and color swept out. The rain of bullets whizzed past, but it could only stir up ripples. Like a stone thrown into the water, it cannot cause any harm to the water itself. The Empress was surprised to see more than a dozen bullets passing through her body in a row, but did not cause any damage to herself. Very curious, he reached out to touch his body. It is even more surprising to find that the touch is no different from normal conditions. Can't help exclaiming, "It's amazing. It's as if we and these bullets are in a completely different time and space." Roja raised his eyebrows slightly and nodded with a light smile. "The explanation is not bad." The Empress thought for a moment in astonishment and wanted to ask carefully. His attention was attracted by the blue orangutans rushing forward. I saw that the madness and tyranny in the eyes of those blue gorilla disappeared in an instant. The eyes are pure, like a glass that has just been cleaned. Their bodies also returned to their normal shape. Then, these blue orangutans obediently came to Roja and knelt down neatly in a row. At this moment, those bullets that passed through the field of knowledge and knowledge also returned to the normal real time and space, but their targets can no longer be Roja and the Empress. Amidst the screams one after another, the position of the prison bombing troops was completely chilled by the rain of bullets he just fired. Skuyard knocked down the last standing blue gorilla with a single blow and turned back to Roja. He knelt down with a snap, kowtowed and said, "The sword slave is not strong enough. The master is tired and takes action himself. Please punish the master." Makagai has also electrified the last group of army wolves, transformed from lightning into a human body, and knelt down in front of Roja. Roja waved his hands and smiled. "Okay, get up." Following the soles of his feet, he twitched vigorously, and Salutes, who stepped on him, let out a wail. He asked the Empress, "How should I deal with this little monkey?" In a secret office on the ground floor. Hannibal grabbed Sadie's whip and whipped it towards him. Shensheng asked, "It seems that something is really wrong." First, there was the violent vibration just now, and then there was such a dense herd of beasts roaring. Something happened down there. Little Sadie lashed the whip and it was out of Hannibal's grasp. The backhand whipped again, and it slammed on Hannibal's ass. Jiao smiled and said, "Whatever happens, just let that dirty guy Magellan take the top. Don't take my whip again, otherwise." After finishing speaking, he started to twitch wildly on Hannibal again. Hannibal's whole body was shaken violently, howling again and again, not knowing whether it was pain or enjoyment. As for the shaking underground and the howling of the herd, he had long forgotten them. As little Sati said, "If there is any problem, let Magellan take the lead." If there were no problems with Magellan, how could he be promoted from deputy to full-time warden by himself? On the second basement floor, all the prisoners have been released. Many prisoners rushed to the first floor with the cells and shackle keys they found, and continued to rescue the prisoners on the ground floor. After being imprisoned in the large submarine prison, these prisoners have long lost their yearning for freedom. Now that he has suddenly regained his freedom, he is a little at a loss, not knowing what to do next. Captain Bucky is so righteous that we have a chance to escape. Why don't we follow Captain Bucky together? This makes sense. Counting the friends on the first floor, we add up to about 600 people, enough to form a powerful pirate group. Conquering the Great Waterway under the command of Captain Bucky seems to be a very promising thing. Suddenly, a cold snort suppressed everyone's heated discussion. The man said in a cold voice, "It's really stupid. Don't you see that Bucky is just a little follower behind others?" "Oh, no, he's not even considered a follower, because others don't take him seriously at all." Another person snorted and retorted, "Don't think I don't know. You are MR.3 from Baroque Studio, Galtino. You just want to trick us into following you and go to the lower level to save your companions?" Galtino fiddled with the three-shaped bun on his head and sneered, "What an idiot among idiots. The young man who came in hand with the Empress is the leader who invaded the prison. Continue to go down, catch up with this person, and join his command is the guarantee of the future. Bucky? He's just a clown anyway." What Galtino said was eloquent. The others were dumbfounded, but they couldn't say anything to refute. Galtino stopped talking to these people, moved his hands and feet that had been restrained for too long, and hurried to the third underground floor. The rest of the prisoners looked at me and at you, and finally followed in Galtino's footsteps and rushed to the third basement floor together. In the warden's room, Magellan frowned suddenly. He issued an order loudly, "Come on. Immediately notify all the defense forces, all give up the defense on the 4th and 5th floors, and immediately assemble on the 6th floor." Domino stuck his head out of the toilet with a thick kerchief covering his face. He asked anxiously, "Master Prison, what happened?" Magellan said in a deep voice, "Saruds has lost. The enemy has invaded the 4th floor." Domino panicked, but he also immediately understood why Magellan gave up 2 floors in a row and went to the 6th floor to organize resistance. The first reason, of course, is to exchange space for time and organize more defensive forces. More importantly, among the prisoners on the 6th basement floor, there was her former direct superior, the former warden, Shirley of the Rain. "Sure enough," Magellan said, "the enemy is approaching fiercely. It seems that we must temporarily release our old friend Shilio. If Shilio can make up for it and help stop this invasion, it is not impossible for the official to return to his post." After speaking, he walked out of the warden's room without looking back. Domino froze for a moment, hurriedly tore off the veil on his face, and followed closely behind. On the bridge across the 4th floor, Roja and the Empress continued to walk slowly. In the huge blood pool under the bridge, the red soup boiled almost eternally. The Empress leaned forward and looked down a few times, her horrified face paled. He murmured, "When the temperature is used to burn prisoners for disinfection, I don't know how many prisoners will be scalded to death." Roja responded coldly, "The color of the blood pool is exactly the color of fresh blood." The Empress pulled the rope held by Salome and asked, "Hey, how can I extinguish the fire here?" At the end of the rope, Saradizi was firmly restrained by the rope around his neck just like a little monkey. Hearing this, he replied in a vicious voice, "Stop wishful thinking. Warden Magellan is in the warden's room on this floor. It's easy to poison you to death." Roja chuckled and said, "We've been here for so long, and we haven't even seen a single jailer. Don't you understand that Magellan has abandoned this level?" Saludes was stunned for a moment, then tore the rope around his neck forcefully. But ordinary ropes can't be opened no matter what. He could only be dragged behind like a dead dog by Salome dejectedly. Soon, a group of people came to the stairs leading to the 5th floor underground. Roja ordered without looking back, "Squad, do it." After speaking, he went straight down the stairs. Squad agreed and turned back to the huge pool of blood that was continuously scorched by countless charcoal flames. The Empress looked back at Squad's back and asked puzzledly, "Lord Roja, what exactly did you ask Squad to do?" Roja laughed and said, "Since the 4th floor is scorching hell and the 5th floor is extremely cold hell, what if the 2 floors are connected?" When the Empress was dumbfounded, she heard the sound of rocks collapsing behind her. Immediately afterwards, there was the sizzling sound caused by the scorching object falling into the icy water. Then, another thick white mist rushed up from the stairwell. It is conceivable that the 5th layer of extremely cold hell is being burned and melted by the collapsed flames of the 4th layer of scorching hell. The Empress suddenly trembled in her heart, and an idea came up uncontrollably. Roja's real purpose is to destroy this big prison, not just recruit a few available subordinates. Roja continued to walk calmly, and the water vapor surging up from below is still 10 meters away from Roja. It was like encountering a cold iron wall and instantly condensed into water droplets. Drips fell back to the ground and then converged into a small stream, flowing back to the 5th floor. In a trance, the Empress actually had the feeling of pushing through the fog. The 5th layer of defense is based on the extremely cold environment. The army wolves that originally moved in groups on this floor were also transferred to the 3rd floor by Saludes, and the entire army was wiped out. In addition to Magellan's order, the individual jailers on duty on this floor have retreated to the 6th floor. The flames and hot soup on the 4th floor kept falling from the gap made by Squad, gradually melt the solid ice that originally covered the 5th layer. The water vapor continued to rise from the gap in the stairs, directly reaching the hunger hell on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor, which was originally extremely dry, also gradually returned to normal humidity, becoming quite pleasant. The prisoners who had just rushed down the 3rd floor felt the temperature and humidity in the air. Can't help but be amazed. Didn't it mean that the 3rd floor is dry and hot? Why does it feel cooler and more comfortable than in the waterside garden? Whatever it is, let the prisoner be released first. Galtino's ears keenly grasped a flamboyant singing voice. I hurriedly searched for the sound, and I found MR.2, Phone Kelii. Seeing Galtino appearing, Phone Kelii was also overjoyed. Eyebrows danced and said, "I knew that you have regained your freedom. The battle just now was really exciting, but it's a pity you didn't see it." Galtino hurriedly asked, "Did the gentleman next to the Empress make a move?" Phone Kelii pondered for a moment and replied, "No." Galtino was taken aback, feeling a little disappointed. But I heard Phone Kelii continue to say, "However, all attacks are ineffective against him and the people around him, including the dense rain of bullets. Shooting him is like shooting yourself with a gun." Hearing this, Galtino was ecstatic in his heart, knowing that he had finally made the right bet. He hurriedly used his wax fruit ability to make a suitable key, and finally opened Phone Kelii's prison cell and shackles. Phone Kelii looked at his expression and said in surprise, "You don't mean you are planning to join this Mr. Roja, do you?" Galtino laughed. "Why not? If we don't take refuge in the ship of such a powerful boss, even if we escape from prison, we will still be arrested in a short time." Phone Kelii nodded and said, "That makes sense. Let's hurry up and rescue MR.1 and MR.0. Galtino frowned and said, "Are you really going to get Crocodile back? Don't forget, who made us fall into this situation?" Phone Kelii shrugged and said, "The temperature suddenly dropped on the 3rd floor, which means that Mr. Roja has already opened up the 4th and 5th floors, so the temperature has dropped significantly. So, after entering the 6th floor, whether you like it or not, you will see MR.0. Galtino was stunned for a while and said helplessly, "Well, that's indeed the case." Phone Kelii smiled and said, "Go down quickly. The 4 strongest jailer beasts were not killed in battle and fled upstairs." Galtino's expression changed drastically, and he said, "I must have gone to find their owner, Little Suddy. You must hurry up and catch up with Mr. Roja, otherwise you will be whipped to death by that crazy woman." Before the words fell, there was a faint commotion coming from the interface between the 2nd and 3rd floors. The two looked at each other and hurriedly ran towards the passageway on the 4th floor of the basement. In just a few minutes, Roja and the others came to the huge iron gate separating the 5th and 6th floors. Roja suddenly remembered something and turned back to Squad and said, "You two, go and release that, the general of the Revolutionary Army in the mezzanine." Skuyard turned around and left. Markagai's expression was fixed, and he pointed to the door and asked, "Master Emperor, do you want to face the last defense of the prison alone?" Roja chuckled and said, "Yeah, seeing you fighting all the way, your hands are indeed a little itchy. After speaking, tiptoe a little." The extremely heavy door opened with a foot. Markagai was taken aback for a moment and hurriedly turned around to catch up with Squad. Roja took the lead in stepping into the stairs leading to the 6th floor. Below the stairs, there were already 2 panicked footsteps running frantically down, but it was 2 jailers running wildly and complaining. "It's already here. Damn, there is no means of communication. Why do we have to come to such a dangerous place to monitor the enemy's situation? Stop talking nonsense, run." The Empress glanced at Roja and finally suppressed the nervousness in her heart. After all, what they are about to face is Magellan, who is known as the strongest in the prison. His whole body was covered with all kinds of poison, and even the breath he exhaled was extremely poisonous. If you touch, you may be poisoned and die. Not to mention, Magellan has developed his poisonous fruit ability to an extremely high level and has all kinds of terrible poisoning skills. With such a fruit ability, can knowledge and domineering be able to avoid or even suppress it? Even if you can avoid poisoning by entering other time and space as you did in the previous siege, how do you attack Magellan? Even if it hits Magellan, it will still be contaminated with highly poisonous venom. Uneasy, the two had already walked to the bottom of the stairs side by side. On the huge transit square, there was only a lone figure standing. This person is more than 3 meters tall and wears a special jailer uniform. A thick cigar was dangling from his mouth, and the fire was constantly spewing out a large amount of smoke. The Empress said in amazement, "Shilu of the Rain, Did Magellan not hesitate to release you, a condemned prisoner, in order to win? Shilio laughed and said, "It turns out that it is Your Majesty the Empress. I have long heard of your title as the most beautiful woman in the world. Today, I can finally witness it with my own eyes. Compared to the prison being breached, what's the big deal about releasing a few condemned prisoners?" Magellan emerges from the shadows of a passage. Followed by his side was a muscular figure. The height of this person is at least 2 meters 5. However, next to Magellan, who was close to 5 meters, this person also looked as short and thin as a child. Magellan laughed and said, "You are so arrogant that you even sent 2 followers to look for the group of mice that were hiding. That's fine. After you've been dealt with, let's wipe out those rats that are neither male nor female." The muscular man with a height of meters couldn't hold back anymore. He raised his right hand, and a ball of dancing gravel sprang out from the palm of his hand. He said loudly, "Magellan, remember your promise to me. After killing this man, let me leave the prison. Otherwise, stop playing Venom in the future and play Poisonous Sand instead." After speaking, he shook his right hand. The dancing gravel immediately turned into a violent sand tornado, flying towards Roja. Wherever it passed, even the incomparably solid floor was lifted up by the sandstorm tornado, turning into wind and sand together, increasing its body. The Empress exclaimed, "King of the Desert, Crocodile, Naval Headquarters." Sengoku frowned and put down the phone bug. Suspicious in his heart, he said to himself, "Why can't I still contact Jin City? No matter how fierce the battle is, it won't be necessary for the communication soldiers to go into battle, right?" Just at this time, Lu Chi knocked on the door and entered. Hui reported, "Roja and the others have already advanced to the 3rd underground floor and started a fierce battle with the jailer beast troops led by Salutes. However, Roja himself seems to have no intention of doing it himself for some reason. Just let Squad and Makagai fight for jailer beasts." So far, the scene is still in a stalemate. Zhangguo nodded slightly and said, "It seems that Roja is really delaying time and doesn't want to be involved in Whitebeard's final battle." Lu Chi nodded and said, "It's basically certain, that's the fact." After finishing speaking, he was about to turn around and leave Sengoku's office, but the Warring States suddenly asked, "Why can't everyone get in touch with Jin City, but you can keep getting the latest information from there?" Lu Chi turned around and said with a smile, "Because I am the #1 agent of the CP system, Marshal." Zhangguo pondered for a moment and finally sent Lu Chi away with a wave of his hand. After thinking for a while, he picked up the phone bug and dialed another number. Soon, a hoarse voice came from it. "The Whitebeard fleet has already set off, and the elite are all assembled on the Moby Dick, ready to use bubbles to march from the bottom of the sea." Hearing this news, Zhangguo was finally completely relieved. There is less than 1 day left for the execution, and Elogia's progress, no matter what, it's too late to catch up with this big battle. On the 6th basement floor of the large submarine prison, Bucky finally rolled down to the bottom of the stairs. "Lord Roja," the top of the stairs was sealed with poison by Magellan. Bucky yelled in horror, and when he looked up, he saw a huge wind tornado connecting the floor and the ceiling, surrounded by several people, roaring towards Roja, King of the Desert. Bucky screamed and fell apart again, falling all over the ground, and immediately pretended to be a dead person on the spot. Seeing that the wind and sand tornado is approaching, Roja is not in a hurry. Looking at Shirlu, who was standing with a knife, he said, "Aren't you going up together?" The cigar on Shirlio's mouth trembled a few times, and he said angrily, "Let's talk about defeating Crocodile, kid." Roja spread his hands and said, "It was agreed to break through the city within an hour. It's a waste of my time for you to come up and send them one by one." "Well, it doesn't matter. There is still more than half an hour before the scheduled time." As he spoke, he stretched out his left hand and made a fanning motion. The violent wind and sand tornado died down in an instant, falling into dust all over the ground. The ability of the rustling fruit contained in it disappeared invisibly. The Emperor's heart sank heavily. It seems that standing by Roja's side is the safest. Rather than appearing this way on the surface, he is also becoming the center of the siege of various killing moves. Suddenly there was a light click. It was Shirlio's scabbard leaning on the ground, which moved slightly and made a loud noise when it collided with the ground. Seeing that his killing move was inexplicably ineffective, the sneer on Crocodile's face froze instantly. Looking sideways at Magellan, seeing that his face was very gloomy, he couldn't help feeling even more heavy in his heart. Before he had time to think about the reason why the ultimate move failed, he let out a loud shout and launched another attack. Desert King Kong Sword. The arms stretched out extremely and turned into 4 huge sand blades in an instant, cutting towards Roja from 4 directions in a cross-siege shape. Seeing this, Roja frowned slightly and said helplessly, "Actually, I really hate sand." As soon as he raised his hand, a wind and sand tornado half a foot high suddenly appeared in his hand. With a flick forward, the wind and sand tornado came out of his hand. In an instant, it soared to a height of 4 or 5 meters. The violent traction burst out from the wind and sand tornado. Crocodile felt his arms tense, and the 4 sand blades transformed from his ability had been drawn into the sandstorm tornado. Even his own body, unable to control himself, was involved together. Why is this? Why does he also have the ability to rustle fruit? If it wasn't for my ability to not be afraid of rustling, I'm afraid I would have been sucked dry and become a part of the sand tornado. Although Crocodile was extremely shocked, he still had to continue to work hard for freedom. With another shout, he forced himself to adjust his posture in the wind and sand tornado and threw a large piece of sand to the ground. As soon as the sand hits the ground, it moves quickly. When he reached Roja's body, he rushed up fiercely, turning into a sharp sword energy composed of sand and poking at Roja's body. Roja nodded slightly and said, "This is what it looks like." As he spoke, he tapped his toes lightly on the ground. A little scattered dust was shaken from the ground. Then, the streaks of sand sword energy dissipated at the same time and fell back to the ground. At the same time, the wind and sand tornado also lost power. Crocodile fell from it, and it was difficult to get up when he fell to the ground. His body seemed to have been cut by countless sword chi, and there was no intact skin. Even the scorpion needle, the weapon on his left arm, was cut and full of scratches, almost shattered. Seeing that Crocodile lost so quickly and so badly, the cold and arrogant look on Shirlio's face finally turned into an incomparably dignified expression. Is it a fruit ability that can copy the opponent's moves? Use the sand tornado to break the desert diamond sword, and then release the desert sword in the sand tornado to attack Crocodile's body. What was the trick he used to defuse Crocodile's desert sword? While thinking about it, Roja turned his head and smiled at himself. Don't think about it if you don't understand it. I'll let you experience it for yourself. How about it? Shirley had never been provoked like this before. With a puff, he spit out the cigar from his mouth. A little flame shot towards Roja's face like a shooting star. Roja pursed his mouth in disdain and said tauntingly, "The waste is indeed waste, so I will only use such small tricks that are not on the table." Not seeing how he moved, the cigar but that was still burning flew back in the direction of Shirley in a straight line at a speed several times faster than when it was flying. Shiryu had no time to dodge and was hit by the cigar. If he didn't know the trick fast enough, he would have shut his mouth immediately after realizing something was wrong. Now, the cigar may have been inserted back into his mouth, and most likely the burning end is facing inwards. For a while, the small square fell into extreme silence. Magellan's pupils had shrunk to the extreme, staring desperately at Roja. However, even if he has pushed his domineering aura to the extreme, it is still impossible to break Roja's defense and counterattack methods. Strong anxiety began to sprout in Magellan's heart. In less than half an hour, Roja and the others penetrated directly from the first floor to the 6th floor. But among his subordinates, Hannibal and Little Sati disappeared. Domino is such a waste, he would rather wash the toilet than fight. Salutes, the only one who dared to fight, was captured alive. Now it is being pulled by a rope, dragging behind the giant python like a dead dog. Worst of all, the communication system of the entire prison was completely paralyzed. As a result, Magellan had no information on the specific strength and combat methods of the enemy at all. That's why he had to retreat to the 6th floor and release the 2 prisoners. It is to use these 2 prisoners to fight the invaders so that I can watch the battle from the sidelines. It is best to be able to win. Even if he can't win, at least he can find out the details of the opponent through the first-line observation. However, the wishful thinking is good. It was only after the fight that Magellan discovered it. I can't understand it at all. Crocodile lost inexplicably. It's also inexplicable that Shirley complained that he suffered from cigars. He even felt like he was blind. Although he has been watching the battle, although he is full of domineering firepower, he has not seen anything. But this situation is not because his domineering arrogance has failed or he is not home. Because he clearly sensed the fear of war that sprouted in Shirley's heart. Immediately shouted angrily, "Shirley, attack!" Shirley's panicked eyes tightened, and then he spat out the blood in his mouth. Forcibly comforting myself in my heart, I said, even if it is the fruit of copying other people's abilities, it won't work for me. Can he still copy my sword skills? With an angry shout, the knife went with him. The famous sword Lei dragged behind him with its sheath, striding like flying, rushing towards Roja. His steps are fast and even, and each step covers a distance of almost 2 meters. In 3 more steps, the thunderstorm he dragged behind could enter the attack range. Hey! Just when the spectators thought that Shirley would continue to move forward. However, he arched his body fiercely, took a stride, and jumped directly over the distance of the last 3 steps. At the same time, the left hand hanging by the side also pressed the handle of the knife together. Draw the sword with both hands. The long and narrow blade flashed out from the scarlet scabbard. Like a black and white lightning bolt, it violently lifted up from the ground. The tip of the lightning just happened to penetrate between Roja's legs. If he was hit by this slashing knife, he would be split in half tragically. A cruel grin bloomed on Shirley's face, because he clearly felt that the knife he just slashed was already the most peak blow in his life. It is the underlying fear of Roja and the oppression of Magellan. Only then did he finally force out his flawless strike in terms of speed, strength, and angle timing. He seemed to have seen the wonderful scene where Roja was cut in 2 by himself. The Empress had long been eclipsed by the horrified beauty of this knife, and in a hurry, she wanted to use her fruit power to charm Shirley. But Shirley's saber power has reached the extreme. How can there be time to stop it? A smile finally appeared on Magellan's face. He secretly praised in his heart, as expected of the prison's #1 murderer, such a knife full of murderous intent. Even if it is me, it is not easy to deal with it. Roja finally moved. His right wrist turned down, as if he was holding an invisible long knife. Follow the backhand and lift it up. Ding! A crisp sound. Shirley found out in disbelief that a sudden force descended on his blade. Even if he is holding Thunderstorm with both hands, even if the strength of his own thrusts has been pushed to the extreme, even the blade of Thunderstorm is less than half a foot away from Roja's leg. Under this powerful force, Lei instantly escaped from his control. When the blade was deflected, it completely violated the principle of things, and it spun and cut towards him. The speed was so fast that Shirley had no time to react. Snort! Shirley only felt a chill in front of him. An extremely sharp coolness extended directly from the top of his head to his crotch. Then, the hat on his head split into 2 and fell to the ground. The uniform of the warden on his body was also neatly torn. The distance was cut in half, separated by a thin line. Shirley's legs went limp, and at the same time as he fell to the ground, he also urinated loudly. Seeing this, Roja frowned in disgust and said, "Waste is waste. It will only torture and kill prisoners who have no ability to resist, and it is useless at all." Until this time, the Empress Fruit ability had just begun to activate, and the smile on Magellan's face hadn't fully bloomed yet. It can be seen that the speed of Roja's backhand and invisible saber energy is so fast and unparalleled. The Emperor stammered, "I am already ready to fight." The smile on Magellan's face was completely dead, but this time he finally understood. What Roja erupted was a terrifying saber energy. The energy response is not high, but it is extremely condensed. In an instant, based on his many years of experience, Magellan came to a terrible inference that made the back of his neck shudder. The way he cracked the crocodile desert great sword just now, could it be that he used grains of sand containing sword energy to impact the countless sword energy formed by the desert great sword at the same time? What kind of terrifying precision control is this? Panicked, Magellan yelled, "Everyone, shoot!" While screaming wildly, a column of purple venom rushed out of his body, rushing straight to the ceiling. Poison channel, open! His huge body, passing through the venom channel, appeared on the ceiling. The sound of intensive gunfire also sounded like an explosion at the same time. In every channel, countless prison bullets were fired at the same time. At a height of less than 3 meters, it was attacked by severe oversaturation at the same time. The long and narrow passage gave the prison bullets enough time to fly, so that they can be fully stretched out and become an overwhelming dense net layer after layer. There is no gap to drill at all. Magellan looked down nervously, because this was already all the prison bombing troops he could organize. If the dense net made of Hylu stone can't take down the intruders, then the only option is to fight to the death. That fellow Hannibal, looking at the big net of sea towers and stones covering all directions. Roja shook his head and smiled, looking up at Magellan on the ceiling. Asked softly, "You gave up 2 floors of prisons and organized a half-day defense on the 6th floor. Is this the result?" With a contemptuous laugh, he swung his right hand in front of him. In an instant, an invisible barrier, centered on the palm, spread to every direction in front of him,